Now that we've gotten a grasp on how to determine the center and location of data, we can now move into describing and quantifying the spread of the data. In this section, we introduce 4 of these measures: range, interquartile range, variance, and standard deviation. There's variation in everything that is made by humans or that occurs in nature. The variation may be small, but it is there. Given a fine enough measuring instrument, we can detect the variation. Variation is either a natural part of the process or inherent to the product, or can be attributed to a special cause that is not considered random. Several different measures of variation are used in business decision making. The simplest measure of variation is the range. It's both easy to compute and easy to understand. It is simply the largest value minus the smallest value. Although the range is quick and easy to compute, it does have some limitations. First, because we only use high and low values to compute the range, it is very sensitive to extreme values in the data. Second, regardless of how many values are in the sample or population, the range is computed from only 2 of these values. For these reasons, it is considered a weak measure of variation. A measure of variation that tends to overcome the range's susceptibility to extreme values is called the interquartile range. The interquartile range is a measure of variation that is determined by computing the difference between the first and third quartile. Again, the benefit to using interquartile range is that it will not be affected by extreme values, thus providing a stronger measure of variation than range. Although the range is easy to compute and understand, and the interquartile range is designed to overcome the range's sensitivity to extreme value, neither measure uses all the available data in its computation. Thus, both measures ignore potentially valuable information in data. 2 measures of variation that incorporate all the values in the dataset are the variance and the standard deviation. The population variance is the average of the squared distances of the data values from the mean. The standard deviation is the positive square root of the variance. It's also important to note that there are units associated with the measurements, so don't lose sight of what they actually mean. The variance will yield units squared, and the standard deviation will be in units. This is largely why standard deviation is the preferred metric. The variance and standard deviation for a sample is similar to a population, except the notation and denominator. Note that we are now dividing by n-1, not n. Here's an example of a sample of 10 data points with x bar, the sample mean, equal to 3. Simply take the difference between each data point and x bar, square, and sum each result. Divide by n-1, where n is 10 here, to get the sample variance. Taking the square root results in the sample standard deviation. Here's a case where the means are equivalent, but the variation in the data differ. Notice how uniform data B are in comparison to data A and data C. Measures of variation in conjunction with central tendencies paint a much clearer picture than using either exclusively. Go ahead and input the following data into Excel, and we'll determine the range, variance, and standard deviation. I typically determine range by typing equals max, select the data, close parentheses, minus min, again selecting the data, close parentheses, press enter. One could also rank from smallest to largest and take the difference between the top and the bottom values. To determine the variance of a sample, type equals var.s, again open parentheses, select the data, close parentheses, press enter. Likewise for standard deviation, we type equals stdev.s for sample, open parentheses, select the data, close parentheses, press enter. Again, we can find the standard deviation by typing equals sqrt, taking the square root of the sample variance, pressing enter. Same result. You could always do these methods by hand to get the same result, but again, using Excel will not only save time, but it will also minimize the potential for errors. And as always, we want to format a couple decimal points.